We are back with part 2 of This Is How You Open an Album, where I talk about various album opening tracks that I think are really excellent, not just in being really good songs, but being really good at opening their respective albums. In part 1, I went through 6 such tracks, which you should check out if you haven't already, and today we're going to go through 6 more. I do want to clarify something important. This is not a comprehensive list of all the best track ones out there. That would take forever, and there's obviously a lot of albums out there that I just don't know. These are just some of my personal favorite track ones that I think demonstrate what good album openers do. But of course, there are many others. In fact, at the end of the video, I'm going to shout out some of the ones you guys were especially enthusiastic about in the comments that I didn't get to in these videos, but that I encourage you guys to tell me more about. The main reason I really love doing these videos is because it just creates space for us to talk about the music we love and why we love it. And so that's what I'm going to do. And I encourage y'all to keep doing it as well. Before we get into it though, just some quick reminders of what we went over in part 1. When it comes to what makes a good, successful track 1, not only should it be an attention-grabbing song that hooks you into the album, but it should also set up the general themes or motifs and the tone of the album at large. Just as with the first scene of a movie or the first chapter of a book, albums operate the same way in that they tell stories just through music. And so a good track 1 should get you excited to hear that story and engaged and ready for what's about to come. Otherwise, without a strong track 1, the rest of the album already falls flat. In line with that, I also mentioned 3 key tropes I noticed in a lot of pop albums that the artist uses to make track 1 a better hook. First, the opening track is the title track of the album. Second, the opening track is not a standard pop song, but is shorter or more intro-like or interlude-like in a sense. And third, the opening track links to the final track in some way. You'll see as we go through these songs, if they play into any of these tropes, how it helps make the song more intro-like and thus more successful as a track 1, but these tropes are not necessary, it's just something I noticed. Again, I explained those things a bit more in part 1, but I'm assuming a lot of you have already seen that, so without further ado, let's jump right in.
Did you hear me? Play the fucking beat!
At first, I was skeptical about including this one. Femininomenon is an amazing song, easily one of my favorites from Chappell Roan still to this day, but what makes it so special as the opener to The Rise and Fall of a Midwestern Princess? The more I thought about it though, the more I realized no other track would have worked quite as well to open such a crazy, emotional, snarky, up and down album quite like this one. And I think that's mainly due to its unique blend of both the tragic and the comic that will end up setting the tone for the whole album. So actually, let's start there on the tone. Femininomenon is undoubtedly fun and humorous, with an incredibly upbeat chorus and a snarky bridge, joking about how men just aren't cutting it anymore. But what's great is how the track bounces between those fun, high-energy moments with the more tragic verses. The song even starts almost like a ballad, with Chappell Roan laying out a, frankly, sad story of a failed attempt at a relationship, how much this specific person, but people in general these days, have to rely on online relationships to find someone, but how often those end up being fake and ultimately unsuccessful. But those mildly sad moments are repeatedly interrupted by Chappell calling for the beat and putting away that sadness to have fun. And I feel like that kind of back and forth between being sad over heteronormative bullshit in relationships versus just not really giving a shit anymore are kind of what make up this entire album tonally, that jumping back and forth, having fun while also contemplating your own loneliness. Then on the note of themes, I feel like this track gives us 2 main themes, one being heteronormativity of course, with many songs on the album showing Chappell Roan breaking free from heteronormative norms and both embracing her own sexuality and encouraging others to break free too. The second one I get is the futility of relationships, or the idea that relationships, whether straight or not, are just doomed to fail, or be misunderstood, or remain casual even when you don't want them to, or you're gonna get ghosted, and so on and so on. These are all stories that are set up very briefly in Femininomenon, but carried out throughout the whole album as Chappell celebrates both the highs and lows of young romance and self-expression. And of course, as with all the track 1s we've been discussing, this song is an amazing hook. It gets you dancing, it gets you thinking, it perhaps makes you wake up next to him in the middle of the night with your head in your hands, you're nothing more than his wife, and it loops you into the journey that is the rise and fall of the Midwestern Princess.
She is a bad bitch, made up of magic,
Coming in at just under 30 seconds long, the national anthem is the short but powerful opening track to Little Mix's 2018 album LM5, considered by many to be their best and most profound work to date. LM5 as a whole is primarily an album about female empowerment, with Little Mix's classic harmonious pop sound taken to its peak and used to tell stories of being underappreciated and overlooked, of being confident in their bodies and image, and of their bonds with each other. So how does the national anthem set all that up in just 30 seconds? Well, on the note of themes, in just 5 lines, this song easily paints a picture of female empowerment, the she here likely being a metaphor for all women, or possibly even them singing about each other. A big undertone throughout this album that heavily inspired it, as Little Mix themselves said, is their bonds with each other as women together, pushing through the music industry with a very oppressive label, with a lot of backlash throughout their career and hyperfixation on their image. And so I think it makes sense how the opening track sets up that bond and that self-empowerment. The last few lines show us that Little Mix is saying they believe honesty and loyalty are 2 of the most important values to have, especially when it comes to how you treat women, because women are bad bitches, made up of magic, and you don't want to do them wrong. This song was originally intended actually as an opener for Love a Girl Right, which is a later track on the album, and probably the song with the most relevance to this idea of being honest to women for your own sake. But as an opener to the entire album, it makes that the underlying idea for all the songs to come, not just that one song. The title being a parody on National Anthem suggests that this is some kind of patriotic mantra that the girls of Little Mix hold dear to them, and having that kind of anthemic nature obviously I think does a really good job of hooking you in, because very succinctly before getting into the meat of the album, they're saying this is what matters, and this is something you better keep in mind as you listen. And recall how this fits into the second trope, where track 1 is not a full-length song, but it's more of an intro. Thus it puts the emphasis on Woman Like Me as the first full-length song on the album. This is brilliant because that was also the lead single, a very similar strategy to Adele's 30, as we talked about in part 1. So after getting this really short, beautiful intro, you're immediately looped into something you've already heard, and so it really gets you excited about the rest of the album. It also transitions well lyrically, with the final line of National Anthem being "Thou shalt be faithful and honest," and the first line of Woman Like Me being "I always say what I'm feeling," emphasizing once again the importance of honesty and loyalty. Musically, this track is entirely a cappella, something we know Little Mix does extremely well. But remember, because it's so short, this isn't meant to establish the sound for the whole album, it just gives you a taste. Here, we get a taste of their vocal ability and their harmony. This song is angelic, it's almost heaven-sent in how their vocals are layered and blended together so perfectly, which once again ties into this idea of them being powerful as a female unit, one and together. And I think having no instruments kind of adds to that effect because it's just them singing, so they can get their message across loud and clear saying, hey, this album is about us, we are here to be bad bitches, we are here to give you magic, and if you're not ready for that, you can leave. Probably the shortest track 1 we'll talk about, but it gets the job done just as well as any other, preparing you for the beautiful, empowering, and of course, anthemic album that is LM5.
I'm getting older, I think I'm aging well.
Among Billie Eilish's various album openers, while Skinny is, of course, breathtakingly beautiful, and 7 exclamation points is an interesting usage of trope number 2, to say the least, I think the best of Billie's album openers for me has to be Getting Older, the opener to her 2021 album, Happier Than Ever. Now, I could be biased because this does happen to be my favorite Billie Eilish album, at least as of right now, but I think there is something to be said about how good of a hook this song is in particular, even though it doesn't really have any of the intro tropes we've been discussing, other than a little bit of trope number 1, more on that soon. It still feels like it could only be the opener to an album. It doesn't really feel like it fits anywhere else, and that's entirely through the story it tells. It is a compelling narrative told through very simple but hard-hitting lyrics about where Billie's at now emotionally, her sense of purpose, and setting up everything you need to know to guide you through this entire album. On the note of themes, this song, as the title of course implies, is about maturing. It's about getting older, and Billie Eilish talking about all the ways that has impacted her thinking, her perspective on life, whether it be her own self-victimizing or how she views her career and more. So this already feels transitional in nature. Just through that perspective alone, it feels like the start of a new chapter, and thus it works wonderful as the start of an album. This whole album really dives into Billie Eilish's own maturity, her growing up. Having a song just kind of setting that up is really impactful. Also, we do get a bit of the album title here. The opener itself is not the title track, but she does include the title, which achieves a similar effect of getting you excited to hear where she takes the story. She sings, "I'm happier than ever, at least that's my endeavor, to keep myself together and prioritize my pleasure." It's even cooler knowing the title track is toward the end, so you already see, okay, she's giving you a taste of what's to come, what this title and this album is going to be about. It's about how is she going to keep herself together and keep herself happy in different ways than she did before. It really sets up ultimately the title track, which is the fit of rage when it doesn't work out exactly how Billie wanted it to. Then on the tone, lyrically, I think this album starts off on a much more mature note than Billie's previous work. When We All Fall Asleep, Where Do We Go, while being a very serious, personal, tragic album, starts with 7 exclamation marks and Bad Guy, which are both fairly unserious, funny tracks. Her debut EP, Don't Smile at Me, started with Copycat, which is also very snarky and moody. Getting Older, though, is an entirely 180-degree pivot from those. It's mature, it's self-reflective, and above all, it's Billie Eilish holding herself accountable for her mistakes, something she doesn't really do in her previous work, but that she's now going to do, like on Halley's Comet, like on Male Fantasy and other songs. Sonically, I don't think Getting Older is anything profoundly different from her usual sound, but it's very in line with how the entire album sounds. It employs Billie Eilish's soft vocal technique. We have somewhat minimalist production. I think Happier Than Ever in particular is her more experimental album, but it is still, of course, very, very cohesive with everything else in this album, genre-wise. I think what's especially powerful about this song is the final verse. I've had some trauma, did things I didn't wanna, was too afraid to tell ya, but now I think it's time. She's literally saying, at the end of the song, strap in, bitches, this is going to be a wild, wild ride. And that is what it is. It's an emotional tour de force of an album. It almost feels underappreciated to me with just how beautiful this album really is, with how much of an emotional journey you feel by the end. It's personally my comfort album, and I think it's because not only does this song just feel very relatable to me, but it sets up a story of self-discovery that is just so impactful. And yes, I did see all your comments about Skinny. I agree, that is another really powerful album opener, and I could talk about that too, but like I said, if I had to pick one Billie Eilish album opener to talk at length about, it would have to be this one.
It's getting harder every day. Somehow I'm bursting out of myself.
Ashley is the opening track to Halsey's 2020 album Manic, released just as COVID-19 was beginning to creep up on us and make us, well, pretty manic, though that's not really related to this album. While this album gave us some of Halsey's biggest hits, like Without Me and Graveyard, it also gave us some of her most intimate and personal tracks detailing her struggles with her career, relationships, and overall her identity. The word manic is never even spoken in the album, but it evokes the feeling present throughout it of mania, hyperactivity, elevated mood, something associated with bipolar disorder, which Halsey herself has actually been diagnosed with. In other words, this album is an emotional roller coaster as Halsey tries to grapple with her own identity. So how does this opening track work to set that up and hook us in? Let's start with themes. If you don't know, Ashley is Halsey's real name, with Halsey being an anagram of Ashley and also her stage persona, an almost entirely different person as she likes to see it. Thus, by titling this track Ashley, Halsey immediately clues us in that we're getting a closer look at her on this album, the real her, the her that struggles with mental health, the her that exists off stage and behind closed doors, the her that isn't Halsey. And that's a huge precedent to set up right from the start. And she does that with just the title. Again, a title that's not spoken in the song. This is evident through the album cover, where we see little symbols H3 and A01, representing that this is the stage character Halsey's third album, but the real person Ashley's first album. As Halsey repeats in the chorus of the song, "I'm bursting out of myself," seeming to represent the real Ashley bursting out of the persona Halsey. And throughout the verses, she discusses her feelings around if that persona were to disappear. What would that mean for her fans, for her career, her artistry, and ultimately, for herself? She realizes her entire career up till that point has been built on this persona, the persona she created based in rock music, in Americana, and emo. But now, she wants to dig into the real her. Moreover, at the end of the song, we get a clip taken from, guess what? Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind. Stay tuned for more on that soon. And it's a clip of Clementine, the female lead in the movie, essentially saying all of this. She doesn't want to be the persona anymore. She doesn't want to be perceived. She just wants to be herself. and she just wants to figure herself out and her own mental health. And that is ultimately the story of this album. And of course, that sets up the tone as well. This is going to be a vulnerable, a personal album. Beyond that, sonically, the song has a pretty strong Badlands vibe to it. It's electronic and rock meshed together into Halsey's signature sound. And that's the mix we're going to see throughout the whole album, from pop hits like Without Me and Graveyard to more rock anthems like 3 AM, and even the intimate stuff as well interspersed throughout, like Forever is a Long Time, More, and the closing track. And that is the final point I want to bring up. We get a subtle semblance of trope number 3, where the opener links to the final track, not explicitly, but I kind of see it implicitly. The final track, 929, is Halsey's birthday, and thus inherently is another song exploring not just Halsey, but Ashley's identity, the real her. With this joke about how she was born at 9:29 a.m. on 9/29, which is really cool, but then later she reveals that she was actually lying about it to sound cool. And I think, again, that just implicitly ties into this whole idea of persona. And as I talked about in part 1, when the opener links to the end, it's not something you realize at the start. You have to get to the end, and loop back to realize it. But once you do, it just strengthens that full circle nature of the album, and it strengthens the overall story. Halsey is one of those few artists who I think has a nearly flawless discography, and Manic is just one example of that. Honestly, I could really talk about any of her album openers for this list. I personally like this one the most, but I know some of y'all mentioned Only Girl Living in LA, which is also tremendous. But I do want to save The Great Impersonator for a future video. Anyway, speaking of Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind.
How can I tell if I'm in the right relationship? Aren't you really supposed to know that shit?
There were a lot of you who commented about this one. Intro End of the World by Ariana Grande opening her album Eternal Sunshine is of course prime track 1 material. This is definitely one I was considering including in part 1, but the reason I didn't is because I've already talked at length before about how amazing this album in general is. I talked about it a bit here, mainly here, some more here, and I wanted to give space to other albums in that first video. But of course, I won't pass up another opportunity to talk about Eternal Sunshine, my personal favorite album of 2024, and still an album I come back to regularly. As many of you pointed out, Intro End of the World is a phenomenal usage of trope number 2 to set up everything you need to know thematically and sonically before getting into the actual story of Eternal Sunshine. As I've talked about before with story-based albums where the opening track is a short intro-like song, the story usually actually kicks off with track 2, and track 1 just sets up the overall background you need before getting into that story. And that is exactly what Ariana does here. On the note of themes, what Intro End of the World does that is so amazing is it starts with a question. How can I tell if I'm in the right relationship? And this question is the thread that ties the entire album together. Every song on this album tells a different story, but ultimately it's trying to answer that same question. Sometimes she pushes it down, like in Don't Want to Break Up Again. Sometimes she lets her heart and desire take control, like in Supernatural. And finally, she learns to accept she was in the wrong relationship in the final few tracks of the album. And ultimately on Ordinary Things, the album's closing track, she ends on a voice message from her grandmother answering that question. Never go to bed without kissing goodnight. That's the worst thing to do. Don't ever do that. And if you can't, and if you don't feel comfortable doing that, you're in the wrong place. Get out. This is a marvelous example of trope number 3, literally starting off the album with the question and ending the album with the answer. And I think it's a really beautiful answer too, because in End of the World, in track 1, she tries to answer this question by literally pondering the end of the whole world, creating this apocalyptic fantasy. But by the end of the album, she learns that the answer is so much simpler than that. It's just about saying goodnight to each other. It's about loving the ordinary things that you do with each other. Then when it comes to tone, this song I think sets up a tone of imagination and kind of an otherworldly nature that carries throughout the whole album. If I could describe this album with one word, it would be ethereal, and that is exactly how this opening track feels. Combining Ariana Grande's beautifully harmonized background vocals with this orchestral production, along with the imagery of sun and moon and the world ending, you get this track that can only be described as otherworldly. And that tone is carried throughout the whole album, even as we get these disco beats, trap beats, simple piano ballads, all of which are kinds of music that Ariana Grande has done before. This whole album is so cohesive in maintaining that celestial nature, that otherworldliness. This is all especially clear in that this album takes heavy inspiration from the movie Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, which if you've seen it, it itself feels entirely from another planet, exploring all these almost kind of alternate realities. And Ariana Grande gives a similar imagery as well in the We Can't Be Friends music video and the Brighter Days film. But ultimately, I do think that tone and imagery is communicated in the music as well. You know, Ariana Grande has quite a few interesting album openers, and I was considering talking about one of those instead, but I just don't think anything else comes quite as close to how perfect Intro End of the World is.
Come get my things, but I can't let go. I'm waiting for it, that green light.
Lorde's second studio album, Melodrama, is often considered some of her best work to date and a pinnacle of 2010's electropop, detailing the emotional highs and lows of heartbreak, parties, and ultimately maturing into young adulthood. Containing this beautiful synth-pop maximalist production that sweeps you away, Melodrama is truly a force to be reckoned with. I'm a bit late to the train, I do have to admit, as I've only just recently started getting into the album, so y'all are welcome to give me more background that I may be missing. There's truly so much to unpack with this album, I might even do a future video on it, but Greenlight has always been a favorite song of mine, and in context with the entire album, it makes perfect sense as the opening track. And that is because Greenlight is a euphoric culmination of all the emotional highs and lows of Melodrama packed into one song. Let's explore the themes first, as usual. Melodrama is inherently about extravagance. That's what defines the word itself, exaggeration, forsaking the plot for emotion. And so it only makes sense that the opening track of the album itself is extravagant, as Greenlight is. It lays out a scene of a breakup and builds it as Lorde tries to move past it but simply cannot, stuck at a stoplight waiting for it to turn green. And I think that motif of being stuck in your feelings and loneliness is what's really going to resonate throughout the whole album. And in Greenlight, she kind of revels in that stuckness. As she hears sounds in her mind as the production picks up, she exclaims how she can't let go, both remorsefully but almost a little bit excitedly. When you're stuck waiting for the green light, where do you go? What do you do? It's almost like there's nothing you really can do except revel in the melodrama. And that's the scene that she creates before diving into the rest of the album, as Lorde continues to lay out stories of parties and breakups, all these experiences of young adulthood in this very dramatic, extravagant way, giving us that melodrama that she herself has created. Tonally, Greenlight is a very tense and emotional track while also being very danceable and euphoric. And by euphoric, what I really mean is it just feels like a release of energy, of emotion. It's a rush. And that word rush is something that repeats very often throughout this album, and I think that's really the tone set up here. It's a rush of emotions, of production, of music, of feeling. It's one of the most upbeat and loudest tracks of the album. It has this really maximalist electropop production that is really mastered throughout this album. There's the big synths, there's the layered vocals, the almost shouting choir in the chorus that we get more of on Perfect Places and elsewhere in the album. The piano, oh my god, when that piano kicks in the pre-chorus, you just want to get up and dance. I mean, this song is so fun, but it's also intense and heartbreaking at the same time. The perfect melodramatic opening to a perfect melodrama. Now I've talked about 12 album openers in total that I consider to be very excellent, but as I noted at the start, there are of course many more out there that I didn't get to, so I'm just going to shout out some more now that I saw you guys mention a lot in the comments under part 1, where even if I didn't have as much to say about them, or I've already talked about them before, I still wanted to include them and include your guys' opinions as well. So yeah, here's a little speed round of track 1s, you know, Grammy announcer style. Dynasty, Sawayama by Rina Sawayama. Family Tree Intro, Preacher's Daughter by Ethel Cain. Wesley's Theory, To Pimp a Butterfly by Kendrick Lamar. State of Grace, Red by Taylor Swift. 360, Brat by Charlie XCX. Teenage Dream by Katy Perry. I'm That Girl, Renaissance by Beyonce. She Looks Like Me, Imaginal Disc by Magdalena Bay. Give Me More, Blackout by Britney Spears. Future Nostalgia by Dua Lipa. Cruel World, Ultraviolence by Lana Del Rey. And of course, the best of them all.
Remind ya, I'm kinda wet, running down my.
Alright, we're gonna cut that there before this video gets demonetized. And with that, that's all I have for you guys for this video. Please, please, please keep the conversation going down below. Let me know more track ones that you think are amazing. I definitely already have a lot of new music I want to be listening to and that I want to talk about. If you liked this video, leave a like. If you enjoy this kind of content, hit that subscribe button. I'll definitely be doing a video on album closers at some point. Some of you guys mentioned that in the comments. I already had that idea. We're just on the same wavelength like that. But yeah, that's all for this one. I'll see you later. Bye.